And we're live. Welcome to the July Pyroscope community call. Sorry we missed you for the last one. We were changing things around a little bit as to when they were, since we had three different times that were alternating. So there was one for like within North America and APAC. There's an EMEA in North America. There's just a bunch of that changing. So to try to have things be more consistent, we are planning on running the community call on the first Thursday of every month. And that is at 8 a.m. Pacific time, so 5 p.m. European, Central European. So please join us every month if we manage to continue to have it every single month. So yeah, today we have Brian from the engineering team who's going to be talking about a bunch of cool stuff. Want to tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so like Tiffany said, I'm Brian. I work on Pyroscope and a back-end engineer for Pyroscope. And I've been doing a lot of work recently with Pyroscope with AI to continue the AI hype train, and I'm excited to demo some of that stuff today.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, please ask in the chat. I'll try asking things as we go along. If you have questions afterwards, please go on to slack.grafana.com and join us over there and ask whatever questions you may have as well.
Cool. So this is the July community call. Our agenda today, I want to just quick touch on a few roadmap updates. And then I want to dive into Grafana's MCP server and do a little demo on how to use that in conjunction with Pyroscope to help analyze profiling data. And we'll conclude with a little Q&A. So roadmap updates. We have three major open source work streams going at this right now. We're trying to get profiling as a signal in OpenTelemetry, and so this work here is still ongoing. And the SIG group in OpenTelemetry, as alluded to in a previous community call, is still working to commit the V1 spec by August 2025. The spec at this point is quite unstable, so we're hoping this will stabilize a little bit more and we can start advertising this as a viable option for collecting profiling data. In other news, server-side symbolization, which is semi-related, is still in experimental phase. And this is actually dependent quite a bit on Pyroscope v2, which I'll touch in a second. But work is still ongoing here. We are hoping to get this in a production v2. We're hoping to get a production v2 deployment and then test this on top of it. So we're still under construction here. And I guess one other point I should quick touch on with server-side symbolization, for those who don't know, this will symbolize profiling data on the server side, so releasing some resources from the client, so the client doesn't have to try find symbols for functions and module names, while also trying to serve whatever application it's running. And then lastly, sorry.
No, you go, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, and then lastly, a big one, Pyroscope v2, which is our upgraded storage engine. And so we've been doing a lot of internal testing and migration on production clusters, running this internally. I'm sure you'll have seen, if you follow our PRs on the Pyroscope project, there's been a plethora of various performance tuning and bug squashing going on there. And so we're really excited to release this soon. This is a big step forwards in making Pyroscope or making continuous profiling more efficient and more viable with constrained resources.
And then since some of the previous community calls, at least for this year, did not make their way onto the internet, I guess I'll just check on some things. So like what started the idea of like creating a V2 in the first place?
Yeah, so we had a lot of problems with scale with the original Pyroscope. So when let me back up a little bit. When Pyroscope joined Grafana, there was a slight architecture change to adopt um, how Pyroscope's storage engine worked to mirror a lot of other databases like Loki and Mimir and Grafana. And this, because those were proven architectures at that point in time. As time went on, we found out that those architectures didn't lend well for profiling data in general. We had a lot of problems with queries that spanned long time ranges. We found it hard for the backend to scale up properly. So you'd end up scaling. You'd have to scale pre-scale your servers to accommodate, what you consider the largest data, or largest query. So then you'd end up having these servers that were over provisioned. Pyroscope V2 helps make those long queries a little bit more efficient. And there's some other efficiencies too, but yeah, V1 had a really hard time handling scale properly. And we anticipate that V2 can do this much more efficiently.
For the V2, for the users, will they notice, is there a lot of stuff that's changed, or just is it more things that is happening in the back end that makes things better overall, but they don't have to really learn new stuff too much? Or how, like, I guess how much change is there for people who are using it?
So the deployment, if for folks who are deploying V2 themselves, or who are deploying Pyroscope themselves, there's going to be some stuff to learn. It will be a little bit different. Not necessarily complicated or difficult, but definitely different. For those who are just using Pyroscope and aren't worrying about deployments of Pyroscope, this should be relatively transparent for them. They should, hopefully all they see is an improvement in query performance.
And then is there like an estimated time frame when this will be available for folks?
In open source, we don't have a concrete deadline for open source. We're hoping sometime this year. So, I guess to scope it somewhat, but at this point, we don't have a concrete deadline for when we'll release V2 in open source. Really, it's going to depend on how our testing internally goes and how confident we are that the architecture is at a pretty stable point.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. And so that's just a quick touch on the roadmap and ongoing work we have as relates to open source. And so let's move on to Grafana's MCP server. So before we get too far into the weeds, what is an MCP server? The TLDR is that an MCP server is a way for LLMs to interact with other systems. And so you can expose resources and data and behaviors from other systems in structured ways that the LLMs can reliably use. So think of an MCP server being like your API server with REST or GraphQL, where those servers provide structured ways for you to collect the data or perform actions on the data that the server has. And there's well-defined formats for how you do that. And so an MCP server does the same thing, but instead of you calling the server, the LLM calls the server. And so we call these things tools. And so the server will define tools that can be used. And the LLM can enumerate those tools and understand how to use them properly. And this is a good way to provide vendor agnostic ways for LLMs to interact with external systems that otherwise might be difficult for the LLM to get access to.
So I was just trying to do some Googling. Okay, yeah, exactly what you were going to put there. I was going to check, hey, is that the place for people to go. And I will post that into the chat for folks.
Yeah, so model context protocol IO. It gets pretty dense at times, but I added 2 links that are good entry points to trying to understand how MCP servers work. I don't want to derail the community call too much and dive into all the nitty gritties of MCP server, but here's some jumping off points that can help. And so what does architecture look like for you visual learners? You can imagine we have your LLM of choice operating kind of as a client. There's actually a tiny MCP client that each of these applications has. Oh. And these can go and interact with MCP servers that sit in front of external resources. So for example, if you're in Claude and you want to go look up a file on GitHub, if you have the GitHub MCP server installed on Claude, then Claude can use that server to make calls out to GitHub using GitHub's API and collect data. So this server will more or less, think of it as being mini prompts for different API calls out to GitHub. Likewise, maybe we're sitting inside Cursor, like we'll see in a second, and we want to go collect resources from Grafana. Cursor can go talk to the Grafana MCP server, and that server can then proxy requests out to Grafana to collect data. So Grafana's MCP server. Grafana has an OSS MCP server for interacting with Grafana resources. I've linked it there. At the time of writing, we have 39 tools for things like dashboards and metrics data sources and metric data and the logging data sources and the logging data. We can list data sources themselves. We can list users and teams, and we can also interact with Pyroscope data. So if you have a Pyroscope data source on your Grafana, then you can use the MCP server to interact with that data. Okay, cool. So a demo of how this works. So the first thing we want to do is you can download the MCP server in a few different ways, but one of the easiest ways is just use go install. So we can install the MCP server, and then I guess in this demo I'll show you how you can connect Cursor to Grafana's MCP server, or enable Grafana's MCP server in Cursor. So for Cursor, what we can do is we can create a new file, and we can call it mcp.json inside the .cursor directory. And so we've installed the server locally, and now we have this file. And what we can do is we create this structure here. There's this configuration here, and under here we can list all of the servers we want to create. So here we can create the type of server is standard IO. I'll autofill some stuff. I don't think this will be correct, and we'll get to the rest of it in a second. So the type of the server is standard IO. If you go to those resources I linked earlier, you can figure out the different types that are available, but standard IO is the most common one. And then the command this is the link to the MCP server binary. And so I just happen to have mine installed at this path, but wherever yours happens to be installed, this is just a path to that binary. Args, if your server requires additional arguments or has the option to pass additional arguments, you would to the binary itself, you would put them here. And then the environment is here. So I actually have a Grafana running at localhost. And so I want this MCP server to use that particular Grafana. And so lastly, we need a Grafana key. And so we need to generate this key. And so when we do this in Grafana, I can go to localhost. Let me make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. And so on the side, we can come down to users and access. Under administration, users and access service accounts. And so then I can create a service account. I can call this demo2. And I'll just make an admin for now. And so now we have a service account, but this account has no tokens yet. So we can just add a token and we'll create no expiration. And we can copy this token. And then we can go back and paste that token here. And so now we're telling the MCP server knows where the Grafana is located at, and it knows how to authorize with that Grafana instance. So we can validate if this is going to work by coming up to settings, cursor settings, and we can go to tools and integrations. And so now here we can see this is our MCP server named Grafana, just like it is here. And we can see that there's 39 tools enabled. So I can ask cursor, I can say something like, can you list all the data sources available in Grafana? And it'll think for a second here. And so you can see that it made this request to the list data sources tool, and you can open this up and see the parameters it used and the result that was returned. And here it listed out all the data sources that are available in this Grafana instance. We can double check this. So you can see we have one for logs, one for metrics, another for profiles and development, and another profiles and staging. So we can double check this if we come back to our Grafana instance. And look at our data sources. So then we can see here we have one for logs, metrics, some Grafana development ones, Pyroscope development, Pyroscope ops. And so is able to, the MCP server allowed cursor to collect this information. And so now I can ask it more questions. I can say something like, what are the service names? What are maybe 10 service names in the Pyroscope dev data source? And it'll think for a second. And so now you can see that it's calling tools related to the Pyroscope data source. So you can see it actually found it's using the correct data source. So it's asking the tool to use this particular data source, and here's the result that came back. Then it used that result to pipe into a new tool, and it's calling. So it's using the same data source, but now it's providing different parameters for this new tool, and here's the results of that new tool. And now it provides the total results, right? So 10 services in the Pyroscope development data source. I can keep drilling down here and say I know that FireDev 001 is the namespace for the Pyroscope instance deployed in this data source, or that this data source has. So I can ask it, what are the service names for the FireDev 001 namespace. And it'll think some more, and it should give me back all the service names for the FireDev data source, or the FireDev namespace, I should say. And so you can see here's all the names for this namespace, and I might want to ask about a particular name or a particular service name. So in this case, I know that maybe compaction worker. So this is the thing. Compaction worker is the application or the service that when blocks are saved to bucket storage or object storage, compaction worker will go through these blocks and compact them down and deduplicate those blocks. So I may want to know, is there any performance improvements we can make to this service? So I can ask, can you give me CPU hot functions that have CPU hotspots for compaction worker?
And there are a couple of questions. I'm not sure how much you may know since it's not specifically for Pyroscope, but for instance, someone's asking if I can ask about metric data from a dashboard inside of Grafana from Cursor, since I guess it's Grafana MCP, which is not specific to just Pyroscope, but you're adding things from Pyroscope on there. But do you happen to know for that?
Inside a dashboard, I think you can. I don't know all the tools for interacting with dashboards. There's a lot. So if you go to the repository that I linked a couple slides ago, and maybe Tiffany, you can post that link.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab that.
It lists out all the tools that are possible, and so I would browse that tool list and see if you can ask it about metrics or panels inside a dashboard. Now, I know if you just know about metrics in general, you can absolutely ask the MCP server or use the MCP server to help your L1 understand about metrics in general.
And then the follow-up is whether you can ask questions from a web UI or if you need to use Cursor.
So you can use it from any LLM that supports MCP servers. So in this example, I'm using Cursor, which I'll get to in a second why I chose Cursor in particular. But if with Claude Desktop, for example, you can, if you have, I think, a pro account or higher, you can create MCP servers there. Or no, ChatGPT, I think, if you have a pro account or higher, you can create MCP servers, and you can, if you're using Claude Desktop, if they support MCP servers, so you can configure them there as well. So yeah, this is not unique to Cursor at all. Okay, cool. So I just asked it about some CPU hotspots, and it came back with a list of various functions that it suggests are basically on the hot path in this particular service. And so I might scan through here and try find one that seems reasonable. So I like this one, for example, I could say, hey, this function, I wonder if we can take a peek at this function. So I can open it up here, and I can see that this particular function has a lot of CPU time spent on this particular line right here in 584. And so I might want to ask Cursor, hey, can we improve this function in some way? So I can say, I would like to try optimize this function. and we'll see if it can suggest some optimizations for that function.
And then so right now everything that you're doing is inside of Cursor and it's actually going through and doing things related to like your code. Is there a way to actually be able to see how some of this stuff corresponds with what you would see if you were like in the Grafana dashboard looking at Pyroscope, and like how you can see like some either the flame graphs or being able to see like how the different like the breakdown for like the different functions of like this is taking too much time? Like, is there a way to easily go between the two, or are you a little bit stuck?
So at the moment, so there's multi-part answer there. At the moment, you pretty much would have to manually make the link between the analysis being performed here and the corresponding flame graph in Grafana. In the future, though, this tool can be improved further, so the flame graph could be presented directly from inside Cursor. That would be obviously a better state to be in, because then you can see a visual representation of that profile within Cursor. But at this moment, you'd have to make that link manually. And I guess I can quick demo how we might do that. If we come down to drill down and go to profiles, we can search for, we were in FireDev 001 compaction worker. And so come here, ignore all that. And so here's, maybe I can make this just a tiny bit smaller. So here's the corresponding flame graph for what Cursor is analyzing, and Cursor is more or less analyzing this specific flame graph right here.
And then with your with Cursor, can you ask it things like, hey, give me like the flame QL that I would want that you could then dump into to use as a query? Or like, I guess, can you have it give you queries?
Yeah, your success there is going to be somewhat mixed, but I could ask it, can you give me the query for a CPU profile for the compaction worker profile? Sometimes it gets it right, and sometimes it struggles a little bit. And so you can see here, it's going off the rails a tiny bit. But yes, so sometimes it'll provide you. I've tested before, and sometimes it'll provide you something you can kind of just copy and paste. Other times it doesn't quite do that. I think we can improve this a little bit though by making the tool prompts a little bit more refined. It does get tricky though, because depending on which model you use, the prompts need to be tuned in slightly different ways. So there's some work to be done to explore that area. But yeah, I think a lot of folks probably aren't unfamiliar with your model kind of going off the rails and starting to give you data or information that like here it's giving me information that's specific to how you would use the tool to query data, but that's not relevant to a human. A human is not going to want to use the tool directly. Yeah, so slight tangent. But if we jump over to our code, we can see that, and maybe I can close this out a little bit to give us some more space, some more breathing room. But you can see that obviously we would need to analyze and measure the effectiveness of this this change that Cursor has suggested. You can see it's suggesting, it looks like it's pre-sizing or pre-allocating some memory here, so we don't do a few initial memory allocs. It looks like it created some slightly more optimized possibly more optimized functions for specific cases and injected them into the original rewrite row function. And so at this point, we have a set of possibly optimized code that we can review and test and validate that we actually indeed got a performance improvement out of. I will say that sometimes the LLMs are actually quite effective at finding these performance improvements, and we have examples of times when we used an LLM against Pyroscope and got results that optimization results that did help us with CPU and memory. But do take these with a grain of salt. Just because the LLM generated them doesn't mean they're automatically flawless and will work. So you do need to analyze whether this suggestion is going to work or not. But this is an example of how we can use the tool and your profiling data that lives inside Pyroscope as a feedback loop into your code itself. And this can be quite helpful, especially if you don't know where you need to start with when you're trying to optimize a particular application.
And then
So that's it.
I have a question. So Tempo is working on their own MCP server, and what I noticed is that for that one, at least, it seems to be separate from the MCP Grafana, but they are pulling in some of their information specifically from the docs. How much does the Periscope one integrate with like docs that are there?
Yeah, so Tempo, let me just speak quickly to the differences between Pyroscope's approach here and Tempo's approach. Tempo created an MCP server that runs in Tempo. So in the Tempo service, like when you deploy it, you have the option to turn on an MCP server. Pyroscope's MCP server lives in a different repository from Pyroscope, which is more or less a collection of tools to interact with Grafana in general. So this means you need to go through a Grafana data source in order to get access to the data, the profiling data. Whereas contrast that with Tempo, as long as you have a running Tempo instance, you can make requests directly to that running Tempo and get data directly from Tempo. And so you aren't proxying through Grafana and a Grafana data source. There's pros and cons to each. On the one hand, the Pyroscope approach is much simpler to implement, and it also means that you have a variety of. If you launch the Grafana MCP server, you not only have the Pyroscope tools, but you also have all of the other tools that right alongside it that your model can use and infer from. So you saw in the demo I showed, it didn't just use the Pyroscope tools. It used several different tools to answer questions I had about profiling questions. With Tempo's approach, you need to have Tempo's MCP server configured and also Grafana's MCP server configured if you want those two to kind of work together. And so, yeah, I don't know if I fully answered the question, but there's pros and cons to each approach, and they're slightly different between the two.
Since you mentioned in order for them to work together, you need to have both of them running together. How have you tried to see how well that works? Because a lot of people talk about profiling, a lot of people talk about tracing, but then there's that whole bridge between tracing and profiling. And do you know if it's complicated with them being separate like that?
I have not personally tried to have them both interact, but I have had two distinct MCP servers running within Cursor before, one for GitHub and one for Grafana, and your results are mixed. Sometimes the model can intuit how to connect the two, discrete sets of tools. Other times it's less good and needs quite a bit of hand-holding to use a specific tool to make a particular action work, which can be difficult or can be kind of counteract how tools work in general, where you want the LLM to just decide which ones to use and just make that a relatively transparent process where it just uses the tools it thinks is best instead of the user directing what specific tools to use.
Okay, yeah, lots of stuff that I need to go play around with since like how long have you been hearing people talking about MCP servers?
Um, so I'm relatively late to the game. I would say it's this quarter where I've really started to dive into it. But if you talk to Pyroscope founder Ryan Perry, he'll have been on it for quite a while, and he is fully invested in the AI hype train, and produced some pretty incredible results here. I've seen some of the projects he's built with AI and uh, various types of integrations with other systems using MCP servers, and it's been pretty impressive.
And then I was asking earlier, like about whether you had a correlation between what's happening in Cursor and what you would see like in the dashboards. I don't know if I fully asked though. Is there a way to be able to? I assume not because it's separate in a way, but like to be able to see flame graphs. Could you ask Cursor like give me the flame graph? Is that possible?
So right now, how the profiling, so the tool. So short answer, no, not possible right now. Longer answer, right now, when Cursor or any model goes and asks for profiling data, we actually format it in a very specific way that's not how you would the format you would use to build out a flame graph. And so we have this, we actually put it in dot format. So like think GraphViz and visualizing things with GraphViz. So we take the flame graph and convert it to dot format and then give it to the LLM. And we found that they're much better at analyzing profiles in dot format than they are in what we would call flame barrier format, which is what we use to render out a flame graph. So yeah, at this point in time, the data is just structured too differently for the LLM to even recreate a flame graph with how we format it now. But in the future, we could provide additional tools or maybe parameters on the existing tool to request specific formats and maybe some guidance on how it could render out a flame graph. Or we could render a flame graph on the back end as a PNG or something and send it to the LLM of choice. And so then the LLM could just render, a photo of the flame graph, which could help too.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. It's really neat and definitely something that I need to go actually play around with. Yeah, so folks, if you have any questions afterwards, please again go over and join us in Slack. There is a Pyroscope channel over in there. The next call should be on August 7th at the same time and just continue to be recurring. So hope to see you there. And thanks everyone.